IVM.
This is Storytellers and Storysellers live on tape. You're listening to Vineet Kanabar on the IVM Podcast Network. I'm recording at home after a while. My past few weeks have been really fun. I love recording from home. It gives me the feeling of meeting people in my living room. Although the light is not the best, and of course IVM has lovely studios and unnecessarily awesome equipment in those studios. I record at home with a simple mic and a weak ring light, which I'm looking at right now. That said, it's always fun to record at home because I get to speak to people who are not in Bombay. And I mean, although my guest today is super well traveled, it would be painful to come to Bombay in its so-called winter, which is still like 35 degrees outside. My guest today is joining me from Ahmedabad, the city that I love, I'm intimately well aware of. And I know that Ahmedabad gets pretty nice and nippy in December. I'm delighted to be joined by Archana Shah today on this episode. Archana, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I'll give a quick introduction to Archana for my listeners. Archana studied textile design and graduated from NID in 1981. While at NID, she developed... 1981 is
50
years
long
ago. Which is amazing, right? I mean, you have a perspective that most of my listeners will never have come across in their short lives, for that matter, right? So, but back to this introduction. While at NID, she developed a keen interest in the traditional craft skills of the indigenous artisans. She traveled to remote corners of the country to study, understand, and experience the vast variety of weaving, dyeing, printing, embroidery, and ornamentation techniques practiced by different communities in India. This proved to be a very enriching journey. The unique skills of the people of various regions, their distinctive color palettes, and the rich design vocabulary became the base for all of Archana's future work. In 1985, Archana started a clothing company called Bandhej. It was a label influenced by the traditional textile skills, offering a range of handcrafted contemporary clothing created for Indian women with an Eastern sensibility. Over time, Bandhej has created a distinct idiom in its design, offering handcrafted, sustainable fashion that has an understated elegance with a chain of stores in Ahmedabad, Mumbai, and Bangalore. She's designed costumes for feature films like Bhavani Bhavai and Mirch Masala, and for theatre, working on the Festival of India inaugurations at Paris in 1985, Moscow, Leningrad, and Tashkent in 1987, to design architectural style installations that create an Indian mood. She's written a book called Shifting Sands, Kutch, A Land in Translation, and most recently, she's put out a book that is really come at exactly the right moment, I feel. We'll talk to Archana about her book. We'll talk to Archana about the kind of work she's done. I'm super excited to share with all of you her wisdom and her point of view on what is a very real problem that is a byproduct of all the great fashion, right? So, Archana, once again, welcome to the show. I think that is one of the most elaborate introductions we've ever had on this show. Usually I'm just like, hi, how are you doing? And we get started. But I feel like there's a lot of context that introduction brings. So once again, thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for being on this show. Let me get you started by asking you about your most recent book. I think that sets the best context, right? Your most recent book is called Crafting a Future, Stories of Indian Textiles and Sustainable Practices. It is an exploration of the diversity of India's handcrafted textile processes and highlights how this industry can become a tool to combat climate change, a tool to combat unemployment. You've traveled the length and breadth of this country. I know you love traveling as well. But let me ask you this right off the bat. If these textile traditions have existed with us, there's a variety there, right? Why have we neglected them for so long as a people? Is it just the downside of fast fashion and capitalism, or is it something that we've actively just forgotten to curate? What's your view 25, 30 years in on this?
Well, I think it's really, really unfortunate because most parts of the world have lost these hand skills. It is because of our artisans. Till, I would say, till the 80s, they had a local market. Mm-hmm. So the crafts continued. But I think going back in time, post-independence, the Planning Commission, the 5-year plans, supported the handcrafted because they realized that it would help generate livelihoods. So the first 3 plans starting from early 50s, supported in the sense because by then there was industrial production had started in India. And but there were certain items like, say, the dhoti, the sari, the angavastram, that only could be produced by the handloom. You
Right.
see, so there was this kind of support for the handcrafted. And I really think because of that, somewhere, these craft traditions continued. Because when I see that, the world over before the Industrial Revolution, everywhere, everything was made by the hand. But slowly, as industrial production increased, most places in the world have lost it. So I somewhere now feel that it is to the credit of that period that these craft traditions continued. Even today, I mean, and this is a Harvard study done with Tata Trust just a few years back, which says there are almost 30 million people in the handcrafted textile sector, probably
Right.
around 200 in the handcrafted sector. So the number is huge. And it is still wonderful to see that these craft traditions continue, in the sense these skills are not lost.
Right.
The reason I got into writing this book, or the reason why I wanted to travel extensively around the country, is because in the last few years, I have been feeling a couple of reasons. One, of course, to begin with, is that most people keep talking. People in the government, people within my own fraternity living in urban centers, saying probably the handcrafted textiles is
Mhm.
not no longer viable. No longer viable because it's just too expensive. And that the children of the artisans no longer want to continue this work. My
Right.
own experience of working in the sector tells me that all the people and I've worked with hundreds of families around the country over the last 40 years, I would say almost all the children of the artisans I have worked with, their children out of their own choice are continuing this tradition.
Right.
The reason being that they have seen a transformation in their lives. They have seen that they can earn a decent livelihood if they pursue this craft in the comfort of their own house, being their own masters. So
Right.
there are benefits in supporting the handcrafted. Also that, it would stop migration, it would help create dignified livelihoods. There's a whole reasons why I very strongly feel. So I've been hearing these contradictory statements. So I thought I should travel to very remote corners and listen to artisans, because I've also heard that, very often people sitting in urban centers make decisions,
Right.
presuming things about the state of affairs in rural India. So I thought I wanted to travel to really, really areas I did not know and find out, and just spend enough time talking to artisans to find out what are their aspirations. And the outcome is a book, and very clearly I found out that if there is regular work for them, they'd be really happy to work, especially the pandemic.
Right.
After
Yes.
that, they have realized, a lot of people who walk back realize that the city does not actually care for them. And if they
Right.
have regular work, dignified work within their surroundings, they'd much rather stay back with their families and work in their village. You know, Especially people in rural India have a very strong affinity towards the land of the forefathers.
Right. I love it. Thank you for that introduction. I think I heard you say some things that inherently feel contradictory or ironical compared to the global scenario that we see, especially in fashion, right? Today, you have the Zaras and the H&Ms of the world pushing fast fashion. There are terrible working conditions in Southeast Asia or other parts of the world which are serving as the engine of this fast fashion. Whereas there is a super premium being paid for handcrafted, tailor-made, etc. labels, garments, styles in the West, in the global West as well, right? So I find it very strange. I also kind of can hazard a guess as to why this happens, whereas that our traditions, which involve a similar craftsmanship made by hand, a similar innovation in the garment, in the fabric, in the process of taking it to the machine and then turning it into a garment, is that simply because we've lost touch after those first few plans and then just simply focused on rapidly industrialized processes, or is it about a lack of education and access, right? I mean, I know that there are collectives, there are companies like yours who are trying to change that. But en masse, I mean, what is your feeling there, right? How can we do better for them?
Well, as I just said, I'm amazed that you talk about agriculture crisis, In every budget, there is some mention of the agriculture sector. The handcrafted is the second largest. The textile sector is the second largest sector after agriculture. And there is no mention. So clearly, as far as the government is concerned, they have just chosen a different model of development. And
Right.
I'm not saying that you do not need that kind of development, but not at the cost of ignoring another sector, which has the potential of creating livelihoods.
Right.
So I think it's a problem with the kind of development model that we have chosen today. It's completely industrial production, supporting of just large scale industries, foreign investment. It's nothing to look at our own indigenous, and as if the rural India is completely forgotten. They probably, people living in urban centers are wearing blinkers. They don't even look at what is 60% of our population and what is happening in those quarters. And in my travels, I have seen that things are getting better, but in the last few years, the poverty levels have increased, and the disparities, which we all talk about and we know, has increased tremendously. And also, when we look at data, we sort of the GDP, and it is only formal sector is a very small sector.
Right.
The informal sector is almost more than 80-85%, probably more than
85 to
85%.
80, 85 to 88% is completely an informal economy. Yeah.
Yes, and but we have no data for that, so it's completely ignored. We are only looking at one data and saying India shining. It's really unfortunate. The handcrafted sector, on the other hand, has the potential of creating livelihoods. I mean, you do need to look at a development model which is in bottom up.
Right.
I think Gandhi's ideas, and put into context today, because what he talked about, the development of the village economy, but the
Yeah.
basic core idea still is very, very important.
Right.
I mean, for a country to really progress, you need to take everyone along. It cannot just be so top heavy. It is, it's getting more and more. If you look at the pyramid, the top is getting so heavy, it's ready to topple.
Right.
And the bottom, the triangle is getting wider and wider, and the bottom area is increasing. We cannot afford this. We must look at a parallel development model which is more inclusive. And one of the things that, the kind of skills that exist in this country, it addresses also issues of climate change, which have become very, very important, especially in the last 20 years, because it has a very low carbon footprint.
Absolutely.
So between creating jobs, the potential of creating jobs and livelihoods within rural India, you will see people not migrating, not clogging our cities, where people are not. 20, 30 years ago, the cities needed people from rural. Now,
Right.
that is saturated. So, and for people who are coming into the cities, their life, it's really a brutal condition. So, I mean, it just seems like it's a no-brainer to my mind.
It really is. It absolutely sounds like a no-brainer when you put it like that.
And I'm not saying handcrafted against machine at all. We need more ethical means of production. We need to support things which respect the environment and the people in the production line,
Absolutely.
which is really not happening. And that is why we have reached where we have. And, and all this really has happened, escalated in the last 20 years. It's not just, it's the world over,
Right.
When I first started my career and was working with handcrafted textiles out of a sheer joy of, a fascination for the kind of skills I saw. And we didn't need to talk about sustainability because, things seemed, it wasn't such a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
Today, everyone's talking about sustainability. But what? It's just become a buzzword.
Right.
We need to start putting things into practice. We need to start becoming less wasteful. So it's, all these things are connected. You cannot look at one out of context. I think its time has come when we need to look at the impact of all our actions.
I think it's very, very important that we do that. It's very interesting that you put it in such an interconnected fashion. It's also very interesting that there is a phrase, Sauno Saath, Sauno Vikas, that has been coined as a propaganda.
But you can say things. I'm talking of action.
Absolutely.
I don't see it
Absolutely.
in the ground. Reality is not the same. It's not. There are fantastic things which are being said, but are they implemented? I'm talking of implementation.
Right.
I'm talking of seeing the results, the impact of ideas.
Let me ask you this, Archana. And you spoke of two very, very important things, right? There is the development of the handicraft economy, if I may put it like that. I'm not going to say whether it's rural or urban or semi-urban. I think it's a handicraft economy that
Yeah, yeah,
transcends
absolutely.
geography.
Yes, of course.
And you talked about its impact on climate. 8 to 10% of global greenhouse emissions or global effluent emissions can be attributed to the textile industry. That's 8 to 10% of all economic activity in the world that engages.
Yeah, it's huge.
That's massive, right? I
Yes.
don't, I mean, when I've read this, it automatically made sense that, oh yeah, everyone wears clothes, and it's not like everyone wears the same pair of clothes every day. We live in an economy where people buy clothes to wear them on average 5 to 6 times only.
That is the problem.
And then there is the whole problem of clothes being created but never actually being sold and dumped in deserts in Chile and South America. So it's a massive interconnected problem, because it is a massive interconnected part of our lives and the way that we've chosen to live, right? Let me ask you this though, in your travels, and I want to try and put an optimistic cherry on top of this flaming pile of human errors or of but in your travels, have you come across examples that buck the trend, that are shining beacons that we should learn from? And I feel like there may be more than just one. So if you can share a few of these that have.
Many, many, many. First of all, people who work with their hands and people who live close to nature have a very, very different association with nature.
Right.
I'll give you a few examples of, well, there are just too many, but I'll start with Meghalaya. When I was traveling in Meghalaya and in Riboy area, this one weaver, and I'd spend the day at a dyer's place, and she told me this really interesting story. She said the government agency was taught them how to do chemical dyes.
Mhm.
Because they thought that, if they expand their color palette, their market would expand because people like variety. Fine, great. But, in a few weeks, the dyers realized, and they're mostly women who do this dyeing and weaving in the Northeast, realized that some of them were getting this hand rash, and some talked about this kind of chemical material flowing into their vegetable patch, because each home has a vegetable patch and they work in their homes. So they decided that maybe it's not such a good idea. We will revert back to our natural dyes. And if there is a demand, we will buy the thread.
Right.
So this whole idea of being mindful of what happens when chemicals are poured on the land. And what has happened then is they also realize, okay, we need outside orders because we need to earn some cash out of, because otherwise it's a very self-sustaining, there's an abundance of food and, material to build their homes, but they need the cash. So they realized that maybe they do need to expand, and they do also need to standardize, because when they did things for themselves, each lot could be a slightly different color. So slowly they learned to buy a small weighing machine, put down, and measure and then dye so that the next lot would be very similar. Then they started experimenting with more herbs from the surrounding because they did want to expand their palette. But the fact is that they reverted because they realized it was harmful to the environment, right? So people who live close to they do. I'll give you another example of Orissa, which is one of the largest states in the country. I mean, in terms of the number of handlooms in a state. And it is one state where the government policies support the production. 80% of their production is consumed within the state.
Right.
In the Bargar area, western part of Orissa, where I was traveling, I saw school uniforms are in ikat shirt. I saw the boys wearing ikat shirts, the girls wearing an ikat tunic.
But is that the most stylish school uniform of all time?
With denim trousers. So, it's a mix of both. But the fact is, if it's a school uniform, then those weavers in that surrounding area get regular work. Government officials, anybody working in the government or school teachers, applies more to women, are encouraged to wear handloom sari.
Right.
But the very fact that 80% in one of the largest handloom producing states gets consumed within their own state is a fantastic story. There again, I went to a market called Bari Jori Haat. It's a
Right.
local market, starts at 5 in the morning. Weavers from surrounding areas come and sell their produce there. By 11 o'clock, they normally do a sale of over a crore. On a good day, it's reached over
Wow.
2.5 crores. This is direct selling. So this whole
Right.
idea that handloom is expensive and only for the elite is not true, because local people come. I've seen even in the villages, women still continue wearing the handloom saris.
Mhm.
We need to learn from this to see that, we need to offer different models of marketing. You need the high end designer things, which is sort of generating a lot of conversation around the handlooms, but we need multiple kinds of marketing outlets for the handcrafted sector. And in my growing up years, I'd seen that I saw these kind of hearts or marketplace everywhere in Jaipur. In the Chopper, the printers would come every week, some of them even with damp cloth, because dyed on the previous day to sell. So the fact is that artisans had an opportunity to sell directly.
Right.
What happened was they also got feedback. They also saw why somebody sold better than them or whatever. So there was a lot of learning in this situation. So I really think we need to learn, and you don't do it exactly the same. You respond to the times today, and the marketplaces can be slightly different.
Right. Which was what I was going to ask you, right? Because the heart system has been the sort of, it's the central node of the marketplace, the rural marketplace, right? But maybe it's something that needs to evolve. Have you seen any of that happen? I mean, has it evolved into?
Why in cities we have now the local markets for, say,
Right.
organic food?
Right.
The same areas can also encourage artisans from the surrounding area to sell their work directly to the consumer, right? 20, 30 years back, organic food had no meaning. Why is this growing? Because people have started realizing that it's good for my health, right? So I'm saying it's the same audience that you're talking to.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
we just need to find innovative new ways of marketing.
Right.
And there are lots of NGO examples, Charkha in Karnataka being one, which is just trying to prove that handloom need not be expensive. They produce locally and they sell locally. And it's been very, very successful in the last many years. And Prasanna, who initiated this whole project, came from a theater background, and he uses his theater thing to do street plays and take it to little villages and around to talk about the transformation in the lives of the women who work in this organization. And people realize that these are true stories because they actually can see the difference. And so support these activities, and they produce some 30,000 or more meters of just natural dyed handloom fabric every month, and are managing to sell it at very reasonable prices to the local people. So handloom need not be only for the elite. This whole idea that it is only for the rich and only for designer wear and only for and can sell at a certain price point is not true. We have a variety of textiles. There are saris that cost a few lakhs, but there are also saris today in the market that sell for a price that people in rural India are buying.
I think your analogy of organic food just really hits home, right? And again, just like there are gradations of marketplaces in other categories, I think it's very important that we discover those models and not just discover them, scale those models as well, right? And I'm glad that there exists that example of Bari Jori Haat in Orissa that you talked about that has been scaled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a quick break and I'm going to come back and pick your brains a little bit more about what it is that us as consumers can do. We'll talk a little bit more about how you got started. I mean, you're a really early adopter in this space, right? I know it's du jour to talk about it now. Sustainability has become a big buzzword, but you've been talking about this for a long time. So we'll come back right after these messages and talk to Archana Shah a little bit more about sustainability and textiles. Go nowhere. Fascinating conversation on this episode this time around. We'll be back after this break. And we're back. We're on Storytellers and Storysellers with Archana Shah. Before the break, we were talking about the need for figuring out and growing and scaling local marketplace models into for textiles or for artisan work in this space and bring them into the modern age, if I may put it like that. I want to ask you about what prompted you to get into this space, right? I mean, I know right at the top of the episode, we talked about you going into NID in 81. I'm guessing 85, 84, 85 is when you graduated out of there. Oh,
Much
no?
before.
Much before? Okay. So, but 85 is when you started Bandhej, right? First of all, what does Bandhej mean?
Well, when I decided to start a company, a friend said, which is your most favorite textile technique? At that point of time, it was tie and dye. To me, it had a larger meaning of a bond with artisans. I decided that I was going to collaborate with artisans to create textiles for urban markets. So I found that this whole idea of the bond, the whole tie and dye is tying a fabric before dyeing it, which is the bandhani technique. But it's also this kind of bond that you create. So it was this idea of the bond with my artisans, with the people I work with, a close link with them, a real collaboration. I thought it sounded right. I never thought, there would be something called a brand, and it wasn't planned like that. It just rolled into it.
But then how did it turn into a brand? I'd love to get behind that, because the doctrine of sustainability isn't just about sourcing and material. It's also, like you said, about sustainably growing a community and artisans. And it's also about sustainable business practices that also go into delivery, that also grow into how you build seasonality. It also goes into trying to maybe educate your customer a little bit sometimes, right? How did you grow from what you started as a community of working closely with artisans into a brand? What was the vision then, if I may ask? And then how did you grow it from there?
I think it just was an organic growth, because when I started, it was like a virgin territory. There were no other shops, and retail wasn't like we understand. It all happened only in the 90s or the mid 90s. I started in the early 80s. So, and I started with creating, very soon I realized one thing, that, I needed to sell the product to be able to go back and produce more. So that cycle had to work. And so, but when I took these products that I created, or together in our collaboration we created, I took it to the urban markets. It was all very fresh and new, as I'm saying, I'm talking of the 80s. So it was easy in the sense people loved what they saw. It was new, there was novelty. And so I was able to go back. Also very early on, I realized, because my work began with this complete fascination for the artisanal community, their hand skills. But I realized very early on that if I really wanted to make a difference in the sector, I had to continue working with a group of artisans, over a long period of time. It was not do something here just because I wanted newness, go to the next block and then the next state and the next, which is very possible to do. But I just felt that I was going to commit myself to working with a cluster, and only when the demands increase, move on to the next, but in the sense expand that number, but never stop working with people I started working with.
Do you still work with folks you started working with way back when?
Yes.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
in the 80s. And sometimes it's the second generation, sometimes it's the third generation. So it's quite ridiculous that I seem to continue. But anyways, it's been really nice because I work with a lot of young people, and I've known their fathers or their grandfathers. And so the bonds are very different. Also, when you work in the sector, it's very, very different. It's not just work. I've known them as families. They're people, a lot of them, I've stayed in their homes. I've had food with their families. And so it's a very tight bond. It's different. And I've seen the huge transformation. I'll tell you this one little story. In 1977, as a classroom project, I was sent to a village in Kutch called Dhamadka by my teacher with a senior to work on a collection of block prints for Gurjari, which was a state-owned emporium. And this village had no electricity. We were supposed to stay in this village for 2 weeks. I'd never seen something like this before. For me, it was like a first time, no electricity, a village, having to stay there. Also, the village people had not seen urban girls, city girls. It was a very conservative Muslim family.
Muslim
village.
Culture shock.
So for them, they said, what are these two women doing here? So between that, but luckily Mohammed Bhai, whose house we were sent to, or the family we were sent to work with by my teacher at NID, was a well-respected man, and he was
Mhm.
able to convince the rest of the village. Well, whatever the story, we stayed in his house for 2 weeks. It was my greatest learning experience because Mohammed Bhai was very skilled, loved his work. We spent the day at the workshop observing their work. We had to document everything they did before and understand the processes before we actually did this collection. But in the evenings, there was no electricity, so come evening, he would narrate stories about their life and about the work, and traditional artisans always had stories about how they did, why they did, how about the motive. It was a great learning experience. What I enjoyed most was this whole idea of life and work balance. I mean, one flew into the other. And his love for his work, his hearty laughter, which I had not experienced or seen something like this in my urban living.
Right.
And for people who had so little, were able to share, we became part of their family. Okay. This is in 1977.
Mhm.
His son, who had gone to school only till class 7, learned from his father about the tradition, and eventually was given a PhD, an honorary PhD by university in America for a boy who had studied till class 7.
That's
This
beautiful.
is the kind of things people have. This is the kind of traditional knowledge and wisdom that we have, which we don't seem to understand and appreciate, and his children. So this is, I'm talking of Ismail, Mohammed Bhai, then Ismail, his middle son, who got this degree. His two sons today have become globetrotters, invited to museums to demonstrate their work. They lived in a tuta-puta hut. Today they have a lovely house, a lovely workshop. They built a little museum in there, and they have a huge body where they're growing plants for their dyes. They only use
Right.
natural dyes today.
Right.
Artisans learn. They don't need us. What we
Mhm.
imagine that we go and change their lives. They have a lot. We need to learn a lot. We need to build on this traditional wisdom, applying new understanding, new knowledge. And in this village, just a few weeks back, I was there, and Ismail showed me that they had put up a community affluent plant because they want to reuse the water. Look at we are talking of sustainability. We talk, they practice.
Right.
It's
That's
it's
so
and these
heartwarming.
stories are all over the country. There is so much to learn from traditional wisdom. We need to build on this knowledge, not ignore it, not let it die. A lot of it is in the oral tradition. It's not written. And we have not documented it because we don't believe, just historically, Indians are not known to document. But this vast knowledge is still accessible, is there to be tapped.
That's beautiful and so inspiring to hear you talk about it and tell us their story. It reminds me of a trip I had taken when I used to work in Gujarat to a village where there was this gentleman who was the last of his kind to who would fashion an instrument out of a particular type of a gourd, and he would fashion a particular kind of instrument, and there was no demand for that instrument, right? And it's the flip side of the coin because his son was not interested and not keen to continue the tradition anymore, right? And it's just such a balance, it's such a fine balance that needs to often be drawn between our cultures and how we preserve them and why we preserve them, and who then carries them forward. Because I believe, I talk about this from 10 years ago in a small village in Gujarat. I think that gentleman will pass on, and with him so much knowledge and wisdom will pass on. So we
But
need to
don't
do.
you think we need to ask this question? Why is the younger generation not wanting to do this work? That
Absolutely.
will lead us to understanding. We don't seem to want to ask that. We need to understand why things are, why is it?
What have you encountered in your time, right? I mean, for every successful story, there are, I'm sure, 10 which are not, where this doesn't
I'll
happen,
tell
right?
you, but there's horrendous stories about, of course, the young want, everybody wants change. You
Right.
wanted, I want, everybody, from what we see around, we want something different, we want some newness. And I'll give you a story of over a lakh of weavers from Orissa are working in Surat.
Right.
And they wanted to leave. Sometimes you see it's also to do with caste. We have to accept that these are horrible things that exist in our country. And so sometimes, very often, artisans belong to a community which is so called the lower caste. They want to break away from all this and go away to an urban center, to an anonymous living, where, of course, today we are getting into there, even in urban centers, but somewhere it was that breaking away from all what was happening in their village. And also this whole idea of getting newness, a different life. So I'm talking of people who left and went to Odisha and in Surat. But, in time they realized that they had to work such long hours. And from what they earned there, working 15, 18 hours, living in really inhuman conditions, being treated not so well. And the money they earned was not enough to sustain themselves and send something home. Then what happens to families when they get divided and men are alone? They get into a whole lot of out of depression, out of loneliness, into things that not necessarily are very healthy. And so that's kind of a really grim story. And a lot of them went back and now seem to appreciate, sitting on their loom and working makes more sense. It is true and very unfortunate that the boys don't want to continue this work. I'll tell you a story. Just a few weeks back, I was in a village near Kota called Kaitun, which is 18 kilometers from Kota. And in this one town, or one very small town or a large village, there were 3,000 pit looms in use, which is huge in one small area. In the surrounding area, there are 5,000 pit looms producing Kota saris,
Right.
Which is this very lightweight silk cotton Kota saris, traditional saris. What I saw is 90% of the looms, it was women sitting on the looms, because the boys are now educated and think working with this sector is low grade, because that's how we have made it. We have not given value to the handcrafted.
Right.
So, but they are not finding jobs because their education is not taking them anywhere. So actually they are a burden to the family. But I found fascinating is so many looms in use, most of them, 90% of them, they were women sitting on, first time weavers. You see, in the Northeast, Sikkim, there are women weavers, but in the rest of the country, it's mostly men weavers. But in this area, I'm talking of 3,000 pit looms. It's a huge number. First time weavers, young girls sitting and weaving, feeling really empowered and producing very intricate patterns. There was this one girl, and I asked her, she was doing this very, very, very intricate border with a kind of diagonal stripes in gold and silver. And I said, how long will this take? She said, maybe a month and a half to weave. The sari would, on the loom, cost around 30,000. By the time it reaches the shop, would cost around 60, 80,000, depending on who's selling it. So we're talking of an expensive product. Now this girl was just weaving it. And I said, how are you doing this? Because normally you have a graph. And she said, ye teesra sari hai. Ab dimag mein ghus gaya. And then she pulled out this graph paper of this very intricate parrot, bale border sari, And I'm just saying she's the first time she's sitting on the loom. But she's feeling so empowered and so focused that she's, by the third sari that she was weaving, it's imprinted. I showed her pictures of Ponduru in Andhra, where they put a whole design printed on a flex under the warp so that they can follow the pattern. So she was so excited to see the pictures and of what I had on my mobile of other regions of how people wove. I just think that, given an opportunity and now money in the hands of women, because she demanded for the money to be paid to her. If the boys are not going to do it, the girls are doing it, but the craft continues. If there is a market, artisans are more than willing to continue their craft. That is very, very clear in all my travels, and everyone from my own work experience or my travels, we have millions of people who have varied skills. Now it's a design opportunity, a design challenge, a marketing challenge. What can we do with these wonderful skills?
Which is something that I want to ask you, right? Because the moment you talked about this wonderfully talented girl, a woman at the pit loom in Kota, and her excitement at seeing someone in a similar craft with a slightly different process in Andhra Pradesh. What struck me was, wow, that's a ripe opportunity for a talent exchange program. That's
Yes.
immediately you should pick someone up, send them all expenses paid,
I've
3 months.
been saying this to the government for the longest time. You need to create this kind of center where artisans can meet and exchange. There's so much they'd learn from each other. You don't need language, I traveled in areas, even as an urban woman, where I didn't understand the language, but the language of hand skills works. I had no problem traveling all by myself in the remotest corners. Artisans understand each other's language. We need to get them together so that they start feeling empowered and that there is an appreciation. We need to create exhibitions around their work to show that we respect what they're doing. They need to start feeling that there is value in what they're doing. Artisans will continue and they should get paid well. But the fact is, I'll tell you many stories in my travels where women are earning 80 rupees and 100 rupees and 120 rupees. And of course, urban people think, why should they work? But when women get paid in their hands for this, the kind of transformation that is happening in rural India is just amazing. The first time when I heard this woman saw my expression and said, the money that you understand and I understand is different. The organization, and this is in Murshidabad, in a village called Katna, where these women were doing embroidery. And this woman who was giving them work has been giving more than 1,800 women work over a long period of time. And she says, we get work regularly. And we can, depending on the hours we spend, we earn. And we've also realized, because we are taken to exhibitions, that if our product is sold for more, then there'll be few takers. But we are so many, so we need to sell a lot.
Right.
And she said, over time, there's one woman looked at me and said, my husband is a feria. Sirpe, he was taking goods and traveling. He said, from my own earnings, I was able to buy him an auto rickshaw. With the great pride. Somebody said, I put my child through education. Money in the hands of women today is really making a big difference.
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it.
They need to earn more. But let's begin somewhere.
Most definitely. I'm feeling super inspired by your stories, but please go on.
I'm saying in another place, everybody, I believe that the handcrafted has to find its own identity, because you see the market is flooded with palm fabrics which look, and they imitate the handloom, and a lot of retailers sell this off as handloom. But the fact is, we really need to do something about this. If we do hand-spun, hand-woven fabric should become the story of the future, because this is something that you cannot reproduce easily. Machines have a place, and we need, 8 billion people in the world can't be supported with just the handloom. It's a small sector. But I'm saying that each sector needs to have its own identity. So there is ethics, of course, involved. But for the handcrafted, I feel that if it's hand-spun, hand-woven, it will be a unique identity. It will also create more livelihoods, because 6 spinners support 1 loom, which means the numbers expand. Right. In Kutch, say 20 years back, there were no spinners left. Everybody was spinning, but even the farmers' wives would spin, whether it's cotton. The pastoralists would spin the wool. Everybody was spinning in their free time. But there was no demand for it, and people came in the television, whatever the reasons. But today there's a whole new revival. And so I went for this one gathering by an organization called Khamir, which I'm very closely associated. It's an NGO working in Kutch. So, and they were having a meet of the spinners. They'd learned this new skill. They were not traditional spinners, because it was lost. Just like when Gandhiji started talking about spinning in 1917, it was lost. People relearned a skill. So these women were telling me amazing stories. There were women who were in the 50s and 60s, some were widow, some saying, the money I earn, which is very little, say 60 rupees, 40 rupees, 80 rupees, depending on the time I spend spinning. Somebody says, to get snuff, chikni for my, terrible to ask my son for money. Now I can buy it of my own money. Somebody says, I buy candy stick and vegetables, so my daughter-in-law is very pleased with me. So because, it's nutrition for the family. So it becomes supplementary income. we need to understand that it's not only money. It's also this whole feeling of empowerment that earning does to women who were never, traditionally it was the weaver, the potter, the farmer. Even in our census we talk about it like that. A
Mhm,
potter
mhm.
never works on his own. He needs a
Right,
family support. Somebody's
right,
making, the farmer never works on, it's a family.
absolutely.
Weaving and craft activities are all, a whole family is involved. But it was always the weaver. And so the weaver got the money.
Right,
And so the person who got the money was the decision maker.
right.
Now women are saying, if we are spinning, give the money to us.
Which is fantastic, right? Which is a
No,
complete
which is changing because she's putting in that money for nutrition. She's putting it
right,
for food or for whatever. Women spend money. Sorry, I'm talking to you, but women spend money differently.
of course.
And so I'm seeing that this new transformation happening. So I'm just saying that if we support these activities, we can create new livelihoods and a different India. We have this huge opportunity. We need to support everybody who's listening to this. Just buy one handcrafted shirt. You're supporting
Maybe an entire
livelihoods in
family.
rural India.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely. I'm going to take that decision and wear less
One
and
shirt.
less.
One
No,
shirt.
absolutely. Absolutely. Less and less of mass produced.
You have to understand what is it, this thing of the mass produce. What is it? What is fast fashion is something we need to start understanding.
Right.
This whole idea, somebody who's brilliant, large companies have paid very good minds to sell you this idea that you need a new outfit every single day, because buying more means more profit for that company. Why
Of
would you
course.
buy more? Is because your dress or your t-shirt cannot be used after 2 or 3 washes, sometimes not even 2 washes, sometimes just wear once. It is so reasonably priced that you feel, oh, it doesn't matter. But these clothes are made from non biodegradable fibers using the most toxic dyes because they are the cheapest,
Hmm.
paying the lowest and lowest and lowest wages for the production. Otherwise, how is it cheap? So it is,
Of
at
course.
what cost are you buying it? You might think you're paying less, but it's the cost of the environment and the cost of the labor. You're
Hmm.
pushing people to poverty. You wear it once, you will enjoy it once, and you throw. You never think of what happens to it. It goes to landfills. It's non biodegradable. There are mountains and mountains of waste today. Millions and millions and millions of tons of these clothes that cannot disintegrate. They're not biodegradable. They are creating new mountains of waste. And they seep with the rain and all, they seep more toxic materials into the soil. So I'm urging everybody who's listening to this, just be a little more mindful, be a little less wasteful. Enjoy life. Wear the clothes, enjoy things, but just enjoy things. You don't need hundreds of things. You can
Right.
use a few of good quality and enjoy it. Just being a little less, just change your life marginally, little less wasteful in everything you do.
I think those are words to live by. Those are lessons to take from this chat. Wow, man. I knew this would be riveting and it would be an education for me personally. I'm pretty sure my listeners will take it as that as well. But I feel strangely inspired at this point. I have a few. No, I'm not even joking, Archana ji. I mean, I've got a few.
From Archana, where did the G come from?
That's the respect you've
my gray,
inspired at
my
this
gray
point.
hair.
Oh no. I think it's the wisdom and it's the passion with which you just talked about all of this, right? It's awesome. I have one last question for you. It's something that I have some personal stake in as well, right? Like I said, I've been thinking about this because my sister-in-law, wonderful young woman called Gauri Kumar, she runs Kauri Collective, which is a slow fashion label, right? I have partially pivoted to stuff that's sustainable, but I'm still at this moment wearing something that is probably definitely produced in a fast fashion by a fast fashion label, right? So for both me as a consumer and for her as a producer or as a business person creating, bringing to market these sustainable garments, what would you, from your experience of bringing all of this together, right? The artisan who's urban, semi-urban, rural, artisan, fabrics, dyes, traditions, bringing all of this together. What advice would you give to someone who's young, who's starting out in this space, who's, while definitely with a heart in the right place, sometimes enamored by the buzzwordiness of sustainability? What advice would you give to someone who's trying to get into this for the right reasons, to really push boundaries and make a dent, make a change?
Well, I just feel honesty and don't forget your ethics. Just be truthful, I don't think it's to do with handcrafted versus machine crafted or machine made. It's to do with things that last,
Right.
things that are produced ethically, the stories that are spun around a product are true, because we are so full of fake today and so full of generating stories that don't really support the product.
Mhm.
And I think in the long run, truth and a good product will speak for itself. And I think it's very, very essential that we go back to that. Why reproduce something on a machine or digitally printed fabric, which is a block printed image, and pass it off as a block print? I would think that digital print is fantastic and generate new design, new pattern vocabulary for it, because what it can do, a block cannot do.
Right.
And so I just feel that if we just follow this, certain ethics, leave something for a sector to do their thing, develop new ideas for the new machine developed products, and try and see that we are not wasteful, not supporting things that don't last. And I think it is a responsible consumption would become another, because the consumer is really the king. The larger number of, if consumers start demanding for certain quality, at the moment it is these large companies dictating your mind and telling you what to buy. Can we reverse it? Just be a little more intelligent and say what is right, what is wrong, what you need to support. And take baby steps.
Right.
Baby steps in terms of, can I be less wasteful in the kind of water that I use, the kind of electricity that I use? Just baby steps. It's changing our lives a little bit for the better of the environment and our future. It is the young who are marching for climate change. Let's listen to them. Let's say what our future is in jeopardy, the
Right.
future of our planet. And it's because of our consumption practices. And
think
so I
that's-
would just think at the end of it, just be a little less wasteful, responsible consumption.
I love it. I think there's so much to take back from this chat. I'm pretty sure that all the examples that you've shared with us, all the work you've done, I mean, it's so important that there are agents like you who are able to connect the rapidly moving urban India to a more rooted, a more traditional, more sustainable semi-urban rural India, and help bring those practices into how we look at the world. I think there's some fabulous learnings. Thank you so much for sharing those with us. I love the title of your book, Crafting a Future. I think on both accounts, on the economy of it and the ecology of it, I think there is so much that we can do to help craft a better future if we just change the way
Actually, there's a lot to learn from traditional wisdom. Let's build on it.
Most definitely.
Thank you.
Most definitely. Please go out and check out Archana's book, Crafting a Future, Stories of Indian Textiles and Sustainable Practices. Archana ji, it just comes naturally now. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
It was awesome speaking to you, awesome getting to know you a little bit and know about the awesome work you've been doing. I wish you all the best in making the impact that you're having in this space and helping us craft a better future for us. I hope you all had fun listening to my chat with Archana Shah. Thank you so much for sticking on and listening. I know the episode's a little longer, but it's completely worth it. Check it out. Tell your friends about this awesome chat if they'd like to know how the little decisions that they're making of dressing a certain way are destroying our planet. Think about that. While you think about that, don't forget to rate the show, tell a friend, and come back next week to hear me have another fascinating conversation on Storytellers and Storysellers. Shout out to Saurabh and the team from IVM who help put this show together each week. We're nearing the end of this year. There will be a very special solo episode that I will do talking about what I've learned this year and what I've enjoyed watching this year and the chats that I've enjoyed having on this show. Stay tuned for that sometime in the next couple of weeks as we bring this year to a close. For now, this is Vineet Kanabar saying goodbye.